Marketing is the dark side of psychology. Major reason why Charli's album is working so well is because the album is truly artistic. Marketing to me is the study of capitalism. So in a way, escapism isn't escapism at all. It doesn't escape anywhere. It's actually digging a hole. You don't have to play by the rule book of your culture all the time. This whole like personal brand building is oddly to me an extension of simple conditioning. Hello and welcome to Your Personal Music Therapy. My name is Hannah. I'm a speech therapist and writer, and my specific interest is in music and psychology and putting those two things together. And today we're going to have a special research question within the realm of music and psychology, and that is marketing art? Charli XCX recently came out with her newest album, Music, Fashion, Film. I always struggle to get them in the right order, and I don't even know why. This has been a highly anticipated album since her last album, Brat. Back then, she was always labeled the queen of marketing. Now, she's kind of done the opposite, and a lot of people online are talking about the anti-marketing that Charli XCX has done on this new album. But more so than talking about marketing and not marketing, if you know anything about me, you would know that I'm not a huge fan of marketing. I really care about the meaning and the art and the meaning inside art. So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about Charli XCX's new album, Music, Fashion, Film. We're going to be talking about her cover. We're going to be talking about the songs and the philosophy behind it. We're going to be talking about marketing, especially in the idea of anti-marketing and how it's developing at the moment. As always, I'm going to be reading an article that I published before, so if you would like to take some notes or highlight certain sections, the link for this article is going to be down below. The article's title is Charli XCX the best marketer alive or the realest artist we've ever gotten? A speech therapist's individual psychology lesson in music, fashion, film, the start of anti-marketing. Thank you so much to anybody who's commented under my last videos. I really appreciate every single comment, whether it's feedback, whether it's your opinions, especially if it's like music that you love listening to. I always love reading and answering your comments. My ritual is to take on my pretentious glasses for reading, because what is Gen Z if not pretentious? Let's get started. As a speech therapist who skews towards psychology, I've long said that marketing is the dark side of psychology. And these days, it is more often than not the shadow of audible art. In my eyes, if broken down into its basic intent, marketing is the study of convincing people to make financial investments that they are initially less interested in. As such, it is in my eyes the art of abusing natural human behavior for financial benefit. I think this is probably the most important take that I can give to you right now. Marketing is the dark side of psychology. It's the practice of abusing natural human tendencies, natural human behaviors, figuring these behaviors out and figuring out how to financially leverage them. Marketing to me is the study of capitalism. Maybe this is a controversial take, maybe this is a hot take, but I really truly believe that marketing is the dark side of psychology. Ironically, the digital landscape offers a vicious cycle of marketers marketing their tips for marketing towards individuals who are suddenly convinced that they should market themselves, which they need to learn through marketing advice courses. This is the short and ugly origin story of the term personal branding that buzzes through the internet like a swarm of wasps. This whole like personal brand building is oddly to me an extension of simple conditioning a human to associate colors, patterns, fonts with a certain person. I guess you're gonna have to hate me for it, but I really think that humans are deeper than that. I would wish they are, at least. One of these YouTube marketing gurus' favorite examples is usually the album Brat, because it was a hyper successful album by Charli XCX that basically changed the trajectory of her entire career. And it's often mentioned as an ideal example for marketing or branding. Not just because of its color scheme, but partially because of that. And yet the same lady on her very recently released album, Music, Fashion, Film, now talks about the idea of artistic vision and finding the courage to be disliked, which very much sounds like a book about Adlerian psychology. Simultaneously, interviewers call her the greatest marketer who ever lived. This begs the question, can a marketer be an artist? And what, if at all, might the overlap between marketing and arts be? Chapter 1, Intersectionality is the goal. On her album Brat, Charli XCX did everything that the branding gurus would advise you to do. She had a distinct color, she had this vivid green, she had a clear font, a simple slogan, and a vision board behind it, and even this like unbothered aesthetic and demeanor that she formed around the album and around how she presented it formed a perfect ecosystem for brand recognition. The world she has visually created around the album was so solid that the release of the album was basically like moving into a pre-furnished house. Yet, that is the hinge of the only critique that seems possible about this perfectly marketed album. Some people argued it was marketed so well that the music was taking the back burner. And though I'm not of that opinion, this is a clash that exemplifies a very very real dispute between marketing and art. Charli XCX is supposed to be a singer primarily, a star or a vocalist. But these days we prefer terms like artist. But we all know that more people in this artist's team are hired for marketing. They're all working for this artist's marketing so that they can keep making art. In a previous article on visual brands of artists, which I will link over here, I argued that as long as a visual brand is in support of the general message of the music, meaning the visual brand is less important than the music that's behind it, the visuals are an art in and of themselves, and thus included in the art package that the artist or marketer is selling. We call this intersectional art, even though this concept is certainly more difficult to grasp than viewing visual arts, theater, and music as separate concepts. The world of marketing uses a different term for intersectionality. They say it's world building. Through the expansion of social media, we live in an increasingly visual world. However, this nods to the ugly truth that doing it for the views is not doing it for the arts. A focus on visual brands because of social media landscapes doesn't indicate a passion for art per se, but rather it's a passion for money. At the same time, it's also a survival mechanism for stars at this point. So the question of whether marketing can be art begs another much more important yet silenced question, which is, if marketing is art, how can we tell those artists who fake it for the money from those who are authentic artists? In other words, how do we find authentic artists? Chapter 2, the F word. Authenticity. I've written about authenticity numerous times because as a multilingual speech therapist who lived abroad in Taiwan and Korea, I experienced firsthand that the concept of honesty varies greatly across cultures. As most of us probably have already experienced in our interpersonal relations, more or less painfully, every person has their own definition of what honesty means to them. I definitely recommend the exercise of asking the definition of honesty from your friends and then listening to their answer, because I guarantee that you're going to be surprised. There's always a debate to be had about honesty. It's so difficult to nail it down across culture specifically. For me, being born in Austria, where the culture is more German, European, we often do not care so much about complimenting. And if a compliment is given, that means it's a very honest thing. Like, you literally look amazing if you're getting a compliment for looking good in Austria, which is not the case in Asia. People will just tell you look great, and it's just a matter of making conversation. I will not lie. This was a huge cultural learning for me. To learn what honesty means across cultures is a huge network of questions that I'm honestly still tackling. Culture changes humans, and it imprints something on us, and we believe that we're so stuck with it because we're born into this one culture. And when you move to another culture, you realize, wait, the definition of honesty is so different here. And just the definition of honesty in and of itself already changes so many things. And we're not even mentioning all the other cultural practices that are changing, right? The first thing you're going to learn is that you can choose your culture to a certain extent, or you don't, at the very least, you don't have to play by the rule book of your culture all the time. Let's go back to the article. On this debate of interpersonal misunderstandings, the 20th century psychologist Alfred Adler coined the phrase, all problems in life are interpersonal relationship problems. In the 100 years that have passed since he's formed this philosophy, our society has developed maybe even greater societal trust issues. We don't trust the person on the street who's trying to hand us a leaflet because we don't know what they're trying to sell. We don't trust the news because we don't know who paid for them. We don't trust the bank even though we're giving it money. And we seldomly rest assured because we pay hefty insurance taxes. And we don't trust our politicians because, well, in the end, we don't even trust those who we look up to. And that's artists. As we've become a society that often asks why, which is very healthy, a general depressiveness has seemed to have set upon us, which is maybe a little bitter pill that you have to swallow, and it comes along with being a progressive human society. But yet, in this cocktail of mistrust, we become starved for the kind of truthful adoration we once naively thought we could plow through life with. This gave birth to fandoms, which I would argue function much like religions these days. I have a whole theory behind why music and fandoms are religions these days, and I would recommend you check out this one. Fandoms deliver values in a much more impactful way than they ever did before, because now your artist is in your pocket. They post pictures of their breakfast, or they post TikTok videos where they're dancing something that you've maybe also posted already. And there always is this sliver of a chance that maybe your artist will see your Instagram post, your recreation, and recognize that in this parasocial relationship that you're in with the artist, you're also a human. The birthplace of parasocial relationships doesn't need to be social media, but it certainly knits the net between artists and fans much tighter. So you soak up the preachings of your artist every day. You buy their merch, or you make excuses for their pricing because any artist needs to pay their team, right? And yet they sit in a mansion that you can't afford. But you silence this ugly voice with more of their presence on social media and more of the words in your headphones. We call this spiral of engaging with an artist where it doesn't seem realistic anymore escapism. And the fact that we have a word for it means that it has meaning. We might not know if thought precedes language or language precedes thought. But once a word exists, there is at least a mental concept that is being agreed upon. The deepest irony of escapism in fandoms is that it is born from not taking life too seriously. So the life of an untouchable artist suddenly becomes immensely serious to us. This is the big dichotomy of escapism. You try to escape the seriousness of daily life, so you engage with the subculture so deeply that it becomes more serious than daily life to you because it feels less vulnerable. So in a way, escapism isn't escapism at all. It doesn't escape anywhere. It's actually digging a hole. So we lie ourselves into this maybe deceitful idea that our artist is authentic. He or she is a true artist. She or he is for us and for the fans. And this is where I think things get genuinely sticky. Suddenly, your belief in them making music with you in mind actually neglects the fundamental premise of arts. Authentic art is born from creativity, not shaped from a supply-demand chain. The artists that are now exhibited in museums had no fan base to consider. They just crafted what moved them. And this happened to then move others through the nature of its authenticity, bluntness, or shock value. These days, it seems that Charli XCX must think to herself, I want my fans to feel great tonight, so I'll write a song. Even if that were genuinely her thoughts, this is a very freaky scenario for an artist to be in. So instead of asking, who are the genuine artists that also market their art, the question becomes, if it's merely for the fans, maybe it isn't art in the first place. Chapter 3. Narcissistic admirers. Here's the silent theory that I have about how social media will change arts as a whole. I think we will basically be going back in time. And basically, we're already on the track of going back in time. We're already doing it. We're just stepping further and further and further back. If one thing is for certain, then it is that Gen Z are one of the most narcissistic generations yet. And I can say that because I am one. We are uniquely self-centered, as more of us can grasp opportunities that our grandparents couldn't even think of. You can be whoever you want to be, were the tales of my bedtime stories. But someone who could be virtually anything but never became anything hardly listens, literally and metaphorically, as they are very deep in minority complexes. And this is something that Adlerian psychology explains. Artists need to market to the generation who is either still trying to make it or stuck in a minority complex. I actually recall calling artists just stars merely a few years ago, which gave them the air of being unreachable. But they're not floating clouds anymore. Their output can be measured against public numbers on their profiles, or at least against the pretentious version of ourselves that fans imagine when we sing their songs at karaoke. And this is why I think art will go backwards. Instead of kings who historically hosted musicians at their courts or at their castles, the public will be more and more in charge of paying for art. The discussion about the slow extinction of labels, for instance, is just a recent artifact of how we're going back in time when it comes to who's funding art, which obviously impacts marketing. As such, artists now walk on a brittle path between finding something that inspires them artistically and authentically, while also checking in on whether this might be something that others can relate to, so that the public might keep funding their fantasy. Chapter 4, Why Charli XCX would be a great Adlerian psychologist. The path of being authentic and yet being relatable is the exact debate that Adlerian psychology deals with. Book titles such as The Courage to be Disliked, which is a book I highly recommend, have more recently brought attention to this old school of psychology, which was largely overshadowed by his coffee comrade, Sigmund Freud. Alfred Adler had some advice that might help Charli XCX in her splits between art and marketing. According to his theory, the two main goals in life are self-reliance and harmony, which mirrored into this music and art debate would mean that artists strive to express themselves independently while seeking harmony with their fandom. At the same time, Adlerian psychology stresses the courage to be disliked, since it sees the origin of human problems in interpersonal relations. This suggests the opposite of marketing, where you try your best to be liked and bought. The wall between the courage to be disliked and selling vinyls, which are another artifact of how Gen Z is impacting the music scene, is what Charli X is currently doing her Humpty Dumpty ride on, especially with her new album, Music, Fashion, Film. And now we're going to get a little bit deeper into the album itself. Her new album crafts expressionist soundscapes, free lyrics, and Charli even explains that just because one of the singles is called rock music, which I love, she won't allow herself to be boxed into the rock genre. It is a Charli XCX version of rock, a reflection of life around her through her own eyes. In that way, she perfectly fulfills the Adlerian premise that happiness comes from contribution. She says that she would live and die by the arts that she makes, and thus Music, Fashion, Film is an album about the art that made the artist. The most artistic expression of this idea of the artist is Charli herself, who is not even on her own album cover, making it highly marketing unfriendly and yet very on brand. She decenters herself from art on the cover physically, and instead the icons Marc Jacobs, standing for fashion, John Cale for music, Scorsese for film, are pictured in a solemn kitchen, making the actual title in letters completely obsolete. She didn't need to write music, fashion, film for people to realize this is about music, fashion, film, because these are literally the three people from those three domains. What I find so fascinating about this is that I've recently found out that back in the 90s and 80s, vinyl album covers were really, really artistic because there was more of a demand to have people buy them because people wouldn't be able to listen to the album in advance. So basically the cover was selling the music. That is a very interesting idea because it says that music for a long time has already been very intersectional. It's just that with visuals becoming so important, people have started putting more of their faces on there without it being too expressive. And I think that major reason why Charli's album is working so well is because the album is truly artistic. The album cover specifically is truly artistic. There's a lot of talk about the cover specifically, as is evident by a Vanity Fair article titled, "Why Are There Three Men and No Charli on Charli XCX's Music, Fashion, Film album cover?" Thus, I would argue this album is a beautiful piece of intersectional art, where the visual and the audible part go hand in hand, complementing each other to help the listener grasp the entire concept behind the album. As a side dish, younger listeners get a history lesson on the three men that are in question, and the Google search terms for these three men will probably be rising. To round off this discussion, here is Charli's own answer to the question, is there art in marketing? Because she was asked this very question on Ricky Riederson's podcast. She said, yes and no. It has to come along with art for sure. There are so many stories to be told through marketing, but I think it's done. I think we're heading into an era of anti-marketing, possibly next year. In her own way, Charli XCX has found the perfect way for her own anti-marketing in her new album for her fans, and that is the B-sides. This is an Instagram profile she created to share a few more singles that didn't make it on the album, despite them being an important part of the architecture of the album, as she says. She explains how important it was to let her fans in on the production process, and that the B-sides were kind of like a gift to her fans, while not being crafted for the fans initially. Those extra songs are pressed on single vinyls in a deluxe bundle only, and they will not be available on streaming services, as Charli said. This gives her fans the feeling of being a fly on the wall in her studio, rather than her having to pull a large-scale marketing campaign that would suffocate the real fans and would be received with cautious raised eyebrows by those who don't like or know her. So all in all, there is art in marketing somewhere. But marketing itself still remains a non-art, I would say. To me, it's a form of harmony-seeking service between artists and fans, at least in psychological terms. Some of my favorite lyrics on the album quite literally say that happiness came in a box, never meant that much before, till I met someone who knew how to balance who I am. And this is a lyric from the song I'm Afraid, which actually is my personal favorite song on the album. I love the entire album because it's a very beautiful sonic ride. I think the last time I've had an album that is this sonically aligned was probably Hit Me Hard and Soft by Billie Eilish, which is a very hard balance to strike. To have songs that individually are good and yet they make sense in the way that they are put together, not necessarily through storytelling, because I think that's a difference between how Charli XCX did it and how Olivia Rodrigo, for instance, did it. Olivia Rodrigo built a narrative. She built a concept album. People were actually starting to say this is a real concept album because it had a story arc. It was a beautifully crafted story arc. And within the story arc, she had planted those different sonic highlights, which allowed each song to be different from one another. Whereas the approach that Charli is taking here is more of a sonic landscaping that doesn't take you on a narrative per se through the lyrics, but it does take you on a sonic ride that kind of absorbs you and one song melts into the next. So this lyric from I'm Afraid, happiness came in a box, never meant that much before, till I met someone who knew how to balance who I am, is not just one of my favorite lyrics from the album, but very meaningful, I think, in the marketing debate especially. And it seems pretty representative of her juggling artistic expression and marketing. And then in another very famous song, SS26, she also sings, nothing saves us besides music, fashion, and film. And I have to say, I agree. So I'm curious about what's your take. Is there art in marketing, or does marketing remain a non-art in your opinion? I'm curious to hear your takes. Thank you so much for listening to the Mugcast. I hope you found this topic interesting. Please let me know down below what you thought about it and suggest new topics if you have any. Also, let me know if you have any music that you love listening to that I could be checking out. Hit like and follow the podcast, and I guess I will see you back here next time. Hope you had a nice cappuccino with this episode. See you soon somewhere else on Hannah's Cafe. Bye bye!